Oh, Miriam, you know, yeah, there's so many parts of this entry that are nearly perfect. And, there are a couple little tweaks that you need to do here and there, I think, but it is just about ready for the stands. Such great work. I'm just so happy that you were able to enter this year and to send me such an awesome entry. Really, hats off to you. There are a lot of, like in your conception, there are some really specific ways of doing things, and then you really did them so excellently. So, like, where to begin? If you've been following these late entries, these later full length entries, you'll know that I have been starting at the beginning of E. Now, just a couple of comments, yeah, and then working my way backwards. Okay, but a couple of comments before we launch in. You'll notice that I sort of chopped up your pages, which is, I hope I didn't get any clef changes wrong, but I sort of got everything half the size. So what you sent me is almost twice as wide as it needs to be, right? So just think about I think that some people are setting their screen dimensions to 747 wide millimeters by 420 millimeters high, or whatever that is in imperial measurements, U.S. inches and so on. So I get the feeling people are setting the page image to those dimensions, but they're not setting the score image to those dimensions. And if you did that, you'd find you have a lot more room, and you can make your staves a lot bigger. So were I to have taken your score the way that it would be very small, right, sort of centered right in the middle of this image. So anyways, tweak that. I think next year I'm going to have, I might possibly hire a somebody to sort of check out some scores that aren't in Sibelius and help me to help the people who enter to reformat them the right way. Okay. So, or I might end up doing that myself if I have time to learn Dorico and Finale and MuseScore enough to do reformatting. But yeah, I mean, I have to orchestrate two operas next year. Plus, I have a book and a course planned. So, and the channel and everything else. So wow. um, so hang on. 2023 and 2024 are going to be amazing and incredibly busy. So, anyways, to get back to your score, sorry for the huge diversion here. I really love the way that you kept the strength really powerful here. You could have kept going with your heavy brass too. I don't think it would have hurt anything, but it's good that you cut out the flute family members because they really are not needed. Right, the focus needs to be just right in the center of the sound picture. Hang on, I'm just dialing up my view of the original score. All right, and you roll back the chords right at E to pianissimo. That's totally cool, but I'm not so sold on rolling the timpani at piano. I feel that this really kind of messes up the entrance of the bass clarinet here. It feels a little. I don't know. I feel that this trivializes this, if you know what I mean. Maybe roll down to pianissimo or even triple P, right? So, like here, I feel there's an imbalance. You're having your Yeah, see, so you're fading down to triple P with your strings, but only pianissimo with your wind. So that means is that there's going to be a bit of a dynamic cliff. That is like when these instruments finish, then suddenly you'll hear them gone. I think it would be better to have your violins and violas at pianissimo, just to have them fade down to pianissimo and hold, and then have the other instruments leave the other instruments where they are, or have them fade down to triple P, or to have everybody fade down to triple P, right? I think that it should be a smooth that the release into these octaves should be a completely smooth transition. If you're really obsessed with the balance, you could go to a Divisi octave here, da 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 dum bum, and then this octave would be doubling the violas, right? And then you'd have a perfectly even B octave here. But I would say don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. It's not a crucial thing. And I really like the fact that you are tying all the way to the 6/4, right? Which a lot of orchestrators are choosing not to do that, but I think that Barvinsky's instincts are quite good, in how long the octaves need to last. He was right. So here you have a new entrance, and I feel that like just a plain pianissimo statement here, followed by a piano statement in the clarinet. It just feels a little discreet, right? Could there be possibly a little crescendo mark here, or maybe start at piano, right, so that these balance out? All right. So we end up here, and speaking of balance, like there's so many perfect moments earlier on that here I'm a little I'm not quite as convinced. And the reason for that is I feel that when you have a situation like this, harmonizing from above and within by other wind instruments, which have a very, just have a very shiny kind of a sound, it's hard to keep the foreground element clear if there isn't extra power in the instrument. Now here there is because you were working with horns, right? But here there isn't, right? The clarinets and the clarinet and the bass clarinet, I should say, they are about the same power as everything else, especially with you doubling the flutes like this and the oboes. So so I would possibly bring down the volume above here, the dynamics above. So I would say pianissimo on the top, and you can leave this piano in the bassoons. I think that's fine because they're all working together below, so it's not that crucial. And then and here you could leave your horns piano. Now there's absolutely no need for this 1 and 2. I guess you have condensed things down to a single staff. I'm just going to check something, okay? Yeah, so all right, so you only have one horn, one staff of horns. Just wanted to make sure because I studied this score pretty intensely a while back, but I'm coming back to it fresh this morning. So the point I'm trying to make is that right in here, you absolutely do not need to say 1 on top and 2 on the bottom. Like if you only have 2 players, we know who they are, right? It's the same thing here. You don't need to say this is first flute and that's second flute. This is first oboe and that's second oboe. We know. There are only 2 players available. The natural order of those players is for the first to be on top and the second to be on the bottom. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to make any mention of anything or anybody right here. Now, if you had a single flute or a single clarinet or something like that, then we would want to know which player. But you don't, like if you have both of them, we know who both of them are, and so long as you're not going to mess with their natural sense of seniority in terms of pitch, absolutely no need. It's a total waste of time. Nobody needs you to write that in, okay? All right. So horns coming in. I really love this. I think you should fade out here over the horns. Da 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 dum, and then just come back in at the same dynamic. I would say, pianissimo and piano here. Da 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 dum. Now, are you sure that you want to go ta 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 ta, or do you want to go slur da ta? Right, because everything is so smooth, and like before, you had this, lovely slurs right in here. So do we really want? And there's tons of slurs in other places. So why not slurring here and there and there? All right. So maybe you just forgot and left them out or something. I don't know. All right. And then I totally love the contrasts here, going from melody in clarinet and bass clarinet to melody in horns to melody in strings, first violins and cellos. Wonderful right in there. Now here, you may be perhaps focusing a little bit too much on the lower voices for the crescendo mark here, right? So Barvinsky wants the entire sound picture to increase when he says doloroso, right? He wants a da da dum, and then if he does increase, then you get the ba da on top, right? We get the implied leap from here to this, right? You can hear it in the piano, in the original piano performance. All right, so I would say just crescendo. If you're only crescendoing up to mezzo piano, you don't even need to write mezzo piano in there. Now here, crescendo to mezzo forte, I'm with you. But here you kind of don't even need that. Okay. And to a degree, you don't even need this here at the end. Mezzo forte diminuendo. And then I would say just give us the mezzo piano in the violins, not in all the parts. This will be a given. All right. And listening to the leadership of the second violins above, all the other players will adjust their dynamic down to follow whatever they do. Right? So that's two reasons why you don't need to use this. And you don't need the mezzo piano here either. But I would say definitely give everybody the crescendo here. There's one little problem here, and that is voice crossing. Okay, you're basically using your flutes here as clarinets, right? So you're assuming, they're going to sound fine, sandwiched in between the clarinet and the oboes here. But the thing is, like, you really have to watch out about enclosures like this. Enclosing flutes between oboe and clarinet, right? Because what happens is the brightness of the clarinet, the brightness of the oboe on top and the overtones of the clarinet below start to smother the flutes in between. It wouldn't be such a big concern if all of these players were just playing all by themselves, but then you have the further kind of velvety sound of the strings right beneath. So I'm not totally sold on this. Yeah, I mean, it can work, but it's just not the most ideal sound. It sounds beautiful in your mock-up, but that's, there are places where the mock-up is not really true to what's going to happen on stage, and I feel that this is one right in here. So just really watch out about this kind of scoring, where you're putting the flutes right under the clarinets, right under the oboes. Now, one little caveat to this: if you do follow my advice and go pianissimo with these upper winds, then you're pretty much safe for the first bar. But then if you follow my further advice and go crescendo into here, then that puts this at risk even more. So I think you sort of created a puzzle for yourself with this, right? I mean, you might be better off with this part right in here being like maybe the top two voices here, the first flute and the first oboe, both being oboe parts, and then this lower part in here plus this being clarinet parts. That probably would be more reliable and give you the kind of the sort of mellow inner voice that you want right in here, without any questions of balance and timbral quality. And this is all fine right in here. Nicely scored. All right, and divisi, unison, so just see nice casual little markings. Some people have been marking divisi fully spelled out with capital letters and in bold type and large bold type. So check out how Miriam did it. That's exactly the right way to do it. All right. Okay. I'm wondering if you could make this into like grace notes rather than da 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 dum. We could go drum. It might be might kind of fit the style of the music a little better. But having said that, like you do not have to roll anything, right? You could just have the chord play. You don't have to literally transcribe every gesture, nuance, tweak, roll, whatever that's in the original piano score. But yeah, that's fine. Now, where we run into a few problems is right in here. Okay. And that is the whole question of whether or not this B here is going to interfere with this B here because you've got them both in strings. Right? So it's not like a wind instrument playing the solo, right? And then going to other wind instruments as they descend, as you have strings sort of floating in the background. Here you have this B, and they're going to, like, this one is going to follow that one, and so what's going to happen is the specialness of this B here is going to be lost. That's the and then of course you've also got this B here in cellos, right, where the two notes dovetail. Excuse me. So really, like, watch out for like those questions of texture. Sometimes texture can make a big determination in how functions are laid out across different instruments. Like here, I just think that the B following the B is just a little much. So maybe if these two pitches right here faded out, right, and that way by the time you got to the B, it would feel like a fresher sound. That might be one way of solving the problem. And this is all really lovely in here. Yeah, it's a nice, soft, cushiony. Yep, that works for me. You almost don't even need the horns here. And once again, you don't need to mark 1, 2. We know that these are the only two players available, right? So we don't need to know that they're 1 and 2, players 1 and 2. However, you do need to tell us which clarinetist this is. So it's sort of like the opposite problem. This isn't needed, but it is needed to tell us if this is first clarinetist, second clarinetist, which bassoon player is this? We need to know. Now let's jump back to the D section, where we sort of have the build to the big, massive climax of the piece, sort of starting with this sort of rainfall in here. Yeah, so I really love the way that you have set up the cascading octaves. Okay, and I'm wondering if there could be just a little bit more connection. Like, could the oboe play a role in connecting these octaves here? Like almost like da da ba bum. Like, what if the oboe played this note and then played a note an octave lower, and then came up to join the clarinet here? Then I think everything would just be a little bit more interconnected. There could have been further octave playing descending downward towards, like, bass clarinet could have jumped in as well. But I mean, you don't have to overdo it. I kind of like the more subtle approach, but I do think that there should be just one more little bit of connection between flute and clarinet and so on. Just bridging here. Playing this note, playing an octave lower, and then coming back to the F sharp, written G sharp here. Yeah, and I like the little touches, like the little roll here. So it's becoming a separate part here. These low F sharps rather than anticipatory. It's very nicely done. And I like the way that you keep everything kind of cool and soft, and you even keep back your or your it's all brass, not just heavy brass. Where the way you keep all your brass back to pianissimo, I think that this will balance really beautifully, right? And just a nice integrated sound here with brass and bassoons. That's really just really lovely scoring right in here, and holding on to the high F sharps. A lovely soundscape that you have concocted right in here, and I like the way that you like you kind of you get there with a diminuendo from all parts. It's nice. I would almost be tempted to, well, like to have the diminuendo a little quicker in the bassoons and the strings, but I mean it's set up. The way it's set up is fine. I'm just being a little fussy. Yeah, so this continues on now as the music gets more and more powerful in the brass and the lower winds. Like, by the way, you did not need to have only two bassoons plus, like with the second bassoon doubling on contrabassoon. If you could have had three bassoon players, but this is really nice for like a small orchestra size. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and exactly, like you still have to tell us, like in a part where it's going back and forth between doubling and not doubling for the second, you still have to tell us whether this is part one or part two, and you've told us that it's part one here, right? So, and you don't need to do that with a bassoon. So it's interesting. You're a little inconsistent about that error of telling us, like when when intervals are being played by the first and second player, right? Which you've got marked in here, which once again you do not need to do ever. All right, not unless you have like three voices. So if you had like three trumpets on a staff, or four horns on a staff, and then I would say tell us that this is one and two. But if you only have two players, right, then you don't need to do that. But then here, like you left it out, right? So there must be some understanding that's not a necessity, or perhaps you forgot to put it in. I don't know. But anyway, okay. So back to the actual scoring, not all the minutia of engraving. So look, right here you drop down into a lower octave, and that is something that was written in the piano part for the cascading octaves to drop, but then to jump back up, right, and by the end. But and it's one of those things that I've been pointing out in these evaluations as like unnecessary, right? You can keep the octaves high, because the reason why the octaves drop is because Barvinsky has to keep his hands closer together because of the way that everything is growing, right? And like the exchange between the parts has got to be more, more under control. There can't be so much of a leap with the right hand. So normally I might say, oh, well, you see, you don't need to do that, so don't do that. But here, like, you actually turned it into something really logical by giving this F sharp to the first violin's divisi, right, and then kind of growing in power here. You kind of take away the need for the higher part, and then right in here you have the middle strings playing it and intensifying and so on. I would not, though, pull your punches. So, like, I mean, I think that you should make sure. I'm not so much about the bass part here, but like just really make sure that your cellos and your middle strings right in here, violin, two, and viola, are not underpowered. So starting from piano here and then going crescendo, and then like here you're playing mezzo forte with your middle voices. So this right in here, adding intensity to the trombones, is going to really take away our ability to hear these parts. So my recommendation is that your middle strings should be at mezzo forte by the time they get to here, so they can at least balance with what's going on in these middle strings, or excuse me, in these lower winds. And furthermore, you might want to double them as well, right? So if you hadn't brought in the oboe before, oboe could be doubling second violin right in here. Clarinet could be doubling the violas and so on. Maybe your second bassoon could be doubling the cellos down here. Just some way of just not losing the octaves. I mean, I don't want you to overstress them, but considering how much weight you have in the middle here, this kind of does work, but it just needs a little bolstering, and it needs to not be kept way in the background with the piano here when you have mezzo forte in these parts, right? So that's what... And here you're building up the octaves to be strong. So why are they suddenly weak right in here? All right. Yeah, but I mean, everything else I really, really like about it. Just tweaking the balance right in there would help a lot. And it would also help you to build to this place here much more convincingly. Yeah, and this is just so lovely, the way that this is scored in here. Now, pretty much, if you look at what pitches are being played, so these pitches here are being covered by trumpets, right? And then you've got these fourths here, and they're being covered by oboes. And then you've got this little diminished fifth right in here, and that is being covered by horns. So the whole fact of the matter is, everything that the strings are playing in here is being doubled by some wind or brass instrument. And the overall effect is that the leadership of the strings is sort of being suppressed a little bit, because they are balancing, or they are doubling instruments that are far greater in strength than them when these instruments go to divisi, right? So you could get away with just leaving all of this scoring in the winds and brass the way that it is, and then taking the upper string scoring here and turning it into octaves. And then what will happen is the ear of the listener will just assume that the strings are playing a massive chord here, because the string sound will have the illusion of covering all the other parts. So the thing is, you do not need to cover all of the harmony with the strings. All you need is an octave here, and then let the brass and the winds do all the work, right? Of playing all the harmony. Now, there are a couple of other really weird things in here, in the bass, which I think you need to fix. I think maybe you intended for this to be an E, and instead you scored a D, which you can see. It's you can hear it's kind of in the mock-up. It seems a little strange. And you have this rolled E. I think that's really lovely. And here you've got the coming in here strong on this E. I feel that everything that's going on here needs more help. Maybe the contrabassoon does not need to be just going thunk. Maybe it needs to be going da-dum. Maybe the bass clarinet doesn't need to be playing harmony in here. Maybe it needs to be going ba-dee-doo-dee-dee-dee and helping out the cello here. Just a little bit more weight on those leaping octaves, because they are getting so absorbed by the mass of power that you have on top of it. I mean, it's a great chord, but just the function is getting buried here with all of the richness of this harmony. And that's all the more reason for the strings just to go to simple octaves here. Simple octave melody, and just let everybody else do the work. I'd say just make a copy of your file, try scoring it that way, and then listen to it and see see for yourself whether or not I'm wrong or right. Yeah, and then just kind of more of the same on the next page. There's one other little issue here, and that you're going G, right? And what is this G doing in here? It's further making things complex, I feel, because you already have a very solid E right in here. That's the first thing. It's being doubled by both first bassoon and bass clarinet, which is why I was thinking if you're going to do that, you really don't need, you only need a single bassoon here to hold that down. You don't need both of these voices. You could just have the bass clarinet support the cellos here. They desperately need it, much more so than the first bassoon needs doubling here. Okay, so that's one issue, but the other issue is that like leaping up here and then landing on this G is just really doing strange things to. You wouldn't think that this note would be all that powerful, but it is, and it is messing up the clarity of this writing right in here, like the further messing up the leaping octaves, and it's also putting like a weird overtone into the middle of the orchestra, right? So it's something I just really don't feel is necessary for the harmony. Now here, going up to this D, that works a whole lot better, but it still is kind of interfering with the leaping octaves. Like it's harder to hear them, right? Their function just once again seems a little submerged, and so and once again, contrabassoon and bass clarinet could work together to really solidify the leaping octaves here. Okay. So now we get to the fun parts right in here. Now, I think that you have a really great conception of how the all of those repeated chords and intervals and the kind of the arcing, leaping stuff could be realized. I would say that there are a couple of conflicts, like here, you have like sort of semi-smooth, you've got these little slurs and so on and so forth. While meanwhile the bassoon is just going bang 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 bang, and the clarinet is going chonk 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 chonk. So like right in here, I'm just going to make a quick side comment, and that is notice how easy it is, like how similar these two things look to each other: B flat clarinet and bass clarinet. All right. So it would be kind of a tyro mistake for a conductor to confuse the two together. But sometimes when you're in an incredible hurry, you can look at the wrong part and get it confused, especially when there are reduced pages that sort of kind of go back and forth suddenly between different things. So like we know it's a clarinet. We don't need to know that it's B flat. We know that from the beginning of the piece. And the player knows which instrument they're playing, and we can tell by looking at the key signature. So I don't think there's any need to say B flat clarinet here. I think it's just better to say, fl, ob, cl, b, cl, bussen, right? This is interesting, sieben. So I think you should have the same abbreviation. Probably it's better to just say CB. I think everybody knows what CB means, right? Sometimes people will say, well, what about the contrabass down here? That is C small b, period. All right. Okay, so so let's get back to your scoring and not get distracted again. All right, so I love all the accents in here. I think this is great, but I just think that the horns and the violas need to be accented along. Like, I think all of the slurs and the things in here, I don't think that they're really doing a whole lot for the for the scoring. And I think that you're also setting up like little weird things, which is like, if you have divisi players, one of them's got a slur and the other one doesn't, but they're not in separate voices. Stuff like that. I think you just, like, nobody's going to really hear the subtleness of the slurs and everything else that's in here. I think it would be better just to have everybody just hammering away, with the accents and so on. I love the way that you took away the gaps and that you just have arcs scored across these parts. All right. Okay, so like as far as everything else is concerned, I like how you interpreted the all the repeated stuff, and I think it's really cool the way the trombones come in here, and you don't need to write 1 and 2, right? We know that they are like this is great. Two, due, right? That's fine, but you don't need to tell us like when it goes back into intervals, we know who is who, right? Unless you have a third player. Like if you have a third player, then do this. But if you don't have a third player, then we know that the two available voices are the two players that we have available. Okay, so here, like, let's talk about the melody, all right? I sound like a psychologist. Let's talk about your mom. Let's talk about the melody. Okay, so I think this is perfectly fine. Like you're keeping the trumpet low, like not too high, not screamingly loud, like or screamingly high to sort of push it up into like needing a D trumpet or a C trumpet. Excuse me, a E flat trumpet. I meant to say, and that's fine. Okay, but I just feel that these second violins right in here are going to, I mean, they will play a part, but they're just not in a very strong place. And what's more, the piccolo all by itself up here is going to sound a little tinny, right? So you have really strong horns, really strong trumpets, and you have the very kind of squeaky piccolo up here. So it's going to kind of increase the sort of high range. So you're going to hear a lot of high frequencies that don't have any moderation. So my recommendation would be to add an octave in your violins. Now you could do this just by jumping up both parts an octave. You could do it by leaving the second violins where they are and having the first violins play in divisi octaves, right? It's perfectly fine to send your violins all the way up to C sharp 7, an octave higher than this. That they do that, all the time in theater pieces and Tchaikovsky pieces and so on. Don't worry about it. The other issue too is, like, as this section goes on throughout its entire 11 bars, would there be anything that you would want to do to progress the texture? Have certain functions trade off with each other in different parts. Have registers trade off, higher and lower, call and response. Is there something? Could you bring like more motion into the bass? Could you do something with the timpani to sort of build up and crest, like the cymbals could roll or anything like that? Is there something that you could do to like keep it from setting it and forgetting it? Now I know, like, of course you didn't forget it. You worked out every bar of this climax, but what I mean by set it and forget it is having worked out all of the, everything where all of the functions go, just kind of leaving them all in the same place. Is there any way to sort of make this get more and more potent and intriguing and amazing and over the top till finally this comes as a blessed relief at the end, right? Rather than just as an afterthought. Now, right in here, I feel that you could have added way more weight lower down to sort of bring our focus downwards, right? Like, I think that the horns and the trombones could play a role right in here in doubling the strings. And I think that you could have also spared a cello here, right? Everything could just stop here. These lower parts could also, they don't have to continue to hold past the rest. You are completely in control here. And the fact of the matter is that probably in playing the piece, there might be a slight, like playing the piece on piano, there might be a little bit of release here towards the end just to clarify things. Even pedaling each note, pedal, pedal, pedal. All right, so just like to really make all of these clear. So if that's happening anyway in the piano performance, you could probably spare a cello, right? Or maybe a bass clarinet. Just bringing in more middle register, lower register instruments to just really make this forbidding and fierce, and they don't have to, like, those instruments do not have to connect, right? They could go da da da, rest, da 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 da, right? They don't have to like connect with this octave. Although, couldn't hurt. You could put in trumpets here and trombones, and then you could have them fade out before the end here, just so that it doesn't get too intense. You don't have to completely do all the decrescendo, or you could leave the new elements in there to make these B octaves really fierce, and then have them fade out to triple P. So yeah. So anyways, that's just my suggestion. It's like your conception, once again, is just really beautiful. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's perfect, and it's perfect. Like how you execute the conception is perfect in a lot of ways to a lot of the to like the orchestration is perfect to the conception, right? Is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm getting a little sidetracked. But like, is there more that could be done here, right? Could your conception be could it include a progression of the texture? Could it include adding elements of excitement like timpani rolls, timpani hits, cymbal rolls and things like that? Maybe even a tam tam crash or something. Could this be made denser and heavier and more intense and really lead us forcefully into the al argando? And then there's like also one other issue. Like now that it's on my mind, the al argando really didn't al argando very much. Like just like the real kind of heavy, the heaviness of the chords and their weight and their loudness, making them just really slow down, right? Like an overloaded truck kind of rolling to a stop. And then like so yeah, so the perhaps the mock-up didn't really manage that. Now, the thing is that the al argando is just for this bar, right? And then it was really interesting, like right in here, this went really fast. Just went really, really, and if your al argando was really crossing all of these bars, this would be incredibly slow, right? And it would have a tendency to be bigger, right? Al argando means to broaden, right? So you're broadening the tempo and you're also broadening the dynamics to a degree in a lot of instinctive interpretations of al argando. So the dynamics also don't match. So I think that like this has to be slower. And there really isn't a tempo mark here, but it's really kind of assumed that it will be slower by the pianist, right? So I was not too keen on how fast this went. I think it messed up the wonderful solemnity and meditative nature, right? So I would say just put the al argando here. You don't need the dash line. Just mark al argando here. Everybody will get it. And then just make sure that in your mock-up it goes a little slower if you're showing this around, which I think you should. Okay, all right. So now let's jump back to the beginning of this piece. Let's just go straight to the scoring right in here. And just a few comments to start off with. I think that the flutes and octaves work fine here, just in the first bar and a half. But then you're very wise to have the English horn take over the second flute part. I mean, it'll all work because everybody's playing softly, everybody's listening to each other. There isn't anybody big and obnoxious in there, like horns or anything. The weight isn't too heavy in your lower winds, so it's fine. Okay. And then here, this is really lovely, the way that this opens out. You are definitely progressing the texture with just small changes, right? So like you're starting off with just 4 instruments, and then you're adding on more, and then you're changing the context of the melody in here, and then right in here you keep dropping to lower and lower winds, and I mean clarinets are not necessarily a lower wind, but like they have the capacity to go lower than standard flutes and oboes. And then you end here with a complete change of texture from the beginning, and I feel that that's great because it really is it shows us more of an emotional arc, right? Kind of starting off kind of a little distant but still hopeful, kind of almost like waking up in the morning, and then almost like thinking about what is going on, and then ending with a kind of a note of a bit of uncertainty, or like a kind of a resolution that has a touch of sadness to it, right? So I think that this works really, really well. And and here, crescendo to mezzo forte, that's totally fine. And here, like, absolutely do not have to say crescendo to mezzo piano or anything like that. And it's just all, it's fine. And then here you push to mezzo forte, and that is picked up by the clarinets. See, it's just really, really nice scoring. Like you're really thinking about the way that things are being phrased dynamically. Yeah, and then the combination of the horns and or I should say lower winds and the horns right in here. It's just gorgeous. Now, one little thing is you do not need to have a tied half note the way that Barvinsky has it in his scored, right? This could just be a tied dotted whole note across the entire bar. Barvinsky has the two tied dotted half notes because he wants to show you the context of where you're holding according. It's like a technical thing. It's like, here's your hand, and by the way, in the middle of it, you're still going to be holding on to this note, and that way you can pedal. Like if you are continuing to hold on to the note, you can pedal through the phrasing right in here. So it's that kind of thing. It's just a little fussy. He didn't need to do that either, but that's what it is. So you don't need to do it at all. Okay. All right. So let's just talk about the scoring. I was just mentioning that this that this is going to work out fine. And it's good you're telling us that these are both first players. You don't need to tell us that this is first and second. There are no other players, right? So we know who they are. Don't tell us. And right in here, you still don't need to tell us that this is one because you have separated out like the part. But I would say if you're going to continue on like this, put in a second voice whole rest or a bar rest right in here, okay? Not a whole rest, a bar rest. So second voice bar rest, and that just keeps our focus on this top part as being a first voice part or a first player part, and then you're coming back in with these, with separate voices. You don't always have to do that. Like if the voices are really conjoined rhythmically, then obviously that's not necessary. And this isn't necessary either, right? So the 1 and 2, we know who these people are. You don't need to mark that. Not unless there are 3 people per staff. Okay, so this works great, and then and I love the role here of the English horn player in the middle. That's nice, and the way that you get those suspended tones, like with just holding the low bassoon and so on. Yeah, and then this little parallel line right in here with a second flute and first bassoon works. It's just what a great idea. I wish I'd thought of it myself. And now here we get to oboe and English horn playing octaves over bassoons trading off to clarinets. It's a wonderful idea, and I like the way that each phrase here gets its own little arc, right? And then everybody's pushing towards this, where you naturally have the stronger horns, so everybody has to be a little bit louder. But here's a situation where I feel that it balances. You don't need to mark the horns down to mezzo piano to make them work with this intensity of tone from these instruments. I think marking everybody the same in their dynamic weight is exactly the right thing to do. Yeah, and just, the roll of the first horn here. It's absolutely beautiful. And that all balances great at the end. With just a little roll of timpani. Perhaps in Miriam, if you listen to a lot of different entries from this challenge, you might change your mind about the timpani roll, right? If so many people came up with that idea, you might be thinking, well, maybe I don't need to do that then, right? But once again, people may not understand what I mean by like the orchestration is perfect to the conception. I think that Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have a really clear idea of the journey through which the music has to go emotionally and texturally, right? And so you are following that plan, and then inhabiting your outline with the correctly chosen players, right? So that's what I mean by it. Doesn't mean that everything you're doing is perfect, but I mean that the way that you are executing the task of applying the instruments to the right roles and everything else, I think is just really exactly works to how you thought everything up. Now here on this next page, I feel that you don't need your horns submerged quite so far down to pianissimo. I think that they could be fine at piano. everybody's headed for mezzo forte anyways, right? And the horns are in a register, very easy to control, and they won't really start to want to play naturally louder until they start to climb a little bit, right? And that's when everybody else is getting a little bit bigger. So I know what you're doing here, like keeping this softer. You will hopefully keep the violas and all of this middle voice stuff from getting overwhelmed. But I don't think that the horns will prove that radical of a risk. So I think that they can be the same dynamic as the violins. I think you can get away with it. But yeah, this is, the string scoring in here is lovely. I think the double bass, the slurring on the double bass is great. You might want to break this up. So just slur to there and then play this. So, up, down, right? Up, down is kind of probably how this should be done. Yeah, so that like there's, yeah, just with the way of the, yeah. I'm just kind of thinking I have an imaginary double bass. Yeah. But you might be able to go longer with your cello slurring, right? You might possibly be able to slur half bars. This I would have as a separate slur. But I mean, you don't even need to do that. So I like this better, but it doesn't mean that the previous stuff needs to be changed at all. Okay, but anyways, very cool. Like you'd be surprised. Like you'll hand your score to the players, and then you get it back. And always try to do this as you're developing your chops, writing for strings. Get the string parts back and look at how they bowed them. And this would be true even if you are an experienced string player already, like, and you even done some section work, working with a different orchestra, or working with working with the orchestra that you are used to working with. Just like see how they do their bowings. And my advice is, like, if it's your first or second time that you've had your piece played by an orchestra, don't interfere. Don't say, well, I'm a string player, so I think that you should bow XYZ. Even with an experienced player, you might get your string parts back, and see a lot of your slurs and a lot of what you thought of the bowing would go like has been changed by the concertmaster. So you just have to decide whether or not they made the right decisions. This is really cool, the way that the bassoon starts to take over the middle voice responsibility. Yeah, it's really nice, and with the horns in harmony, and the violins and violas as well. So, just the big question here is, like, how long can you keep the figuration in the lower strings? Right? Do you really want to do it for this entire passage? Just going on and on and on and on with just that function being covered by those instruments, by that texture, by that timbre. This is really lovely right in here. Just at B, it's so there's such like sentiment here, like almost nostalgia, like in the way that this is scored, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. Yeah, yeah, and keeping the strings lower and just supporting the winds. That's really a lovely touch in there. Yeah, and a little ting for the triangle. I have to say that in your mock-up, the triangle isn't all that done all that well, and just in general, mock-up triangle, mock-up, notation application sound set triangles. It just, they just don't sound very good at all. It's almost as if, I wonder if the person who did it has ever heard a triangle. Triangles have such body to them. They're so easy to hear if they're done right, and yet they always get buried. And yeah. Anyway, I'll stop griping about it. And this is just really lovely, the way that you set things up here. And then glockenspiel and pianissimo and everything else. So another question too, Miriam, is, are you happy with this? Just the same group of instruments being used to say the same idea again and again, right? Could there have been a trading off of responsibility? Maybe the strings go to a tremolo chord and the winds wander through this lovely idea. Make sure your overlapping lines here have have some kind of continuity. I mean, I don't think it is. I think with the way things are scored, I think you should have fade outs going towards the ends of these lines, and maybe fade ins, right? So that it all like just feels seamless across the entire line. And like here, I'm totally with you on all of this until you get to here. Do not give us the downbeat on on things that are not the melody. So just take out these parts. And I would even like say like if you're gonna fall off the cliff from just before the downbeat. Like do anything you can to just not accompany your wandering line on the downbeat, because like just the slightest hint of harmony on beat one is telling the soloist where to go, right? Again, the whole charm of the Barvinsky piano score is that we don't know where this line is headed because there's no context from the accompaniment, right? So don't give them any whatsoever. And then where it lands is right here on the C section. And once again, I'm just wondering if there's some way to beef up the those octaves, right? My description of this section here is calm surface over restless undercurrent. So the restless undercurrent seems to be a little underscored. Could you possibly have interpreted this as arco and pizzicato string? So like just go divisi on both of these, have complete divisi staves on both of them, and have like half your cellos going pizzicato and then the other half on exactly the same pitch as arco, and so on. Now that would just give it a little bit more punch on each note. Or is there another instrument that could have been used, bass clarinet or some other combination of different instruments that could have just given us a little teeny bit more weight? It doesn't have to be a lot, but just a teeny bit more weight. Or mark it up to piano. Don't have it as pianissimo just because it's pianissimo in the piano score, right? Don't assume that the balance that Barvinsky has in his piano score will apply to an orchestral part. This is lovely, all double reeds, and then adding flute on top. And then adding strings with more strings in the middle voice, doubling the middle voice. It's just really a lovely management of those roles right in here for the viola and the cello. Yeah, dun dun dun, and then you fade everything out and get it ready for D. So I think it's just a terrific score, Miriam. I think you should really feel proud of the work that you did, and with some tweaking, I think that this would totally be ready to show around, to put on a stand at a reading or at a performance or whatever rehearsal. Try to get it played. Seriously, do you know somebody? Do you know a conductor or an available orchestra that wants to kind of show some solidarity with musicians in Ukraine? I can't think of a better way than to have them play your score. Okay, or any of the other great scores that I've seen come across my desk over the past few months. They're like, just speaking in terms, like not really like comparing the quality of one score to another, but just talking about in terms of like which score is pretty much ready to be turned into orchestra parts with just a teeny bit of adjusting here and there. Yeah, so your score is definitely among those. So nice work, Miriam, and thank you so much for the work you put into this, and for jumping into this whole challenge and helping me help out those musicians that I mentioned before, and for supporting the channel and everything else, being a part of these challenges. Like, wow, I'm wondering like what are you going to do next year if you enter the challenge, or the year after that, like for the next 3 years. Like next year we have a couple of different choices by a composer that will seem a little out of left field. And you'll have the choice of composing two different parts of their work, and in two different ways. Either to the style of the composer, or to like any style over the years of over the history of orchestration. And then the following year there will be a like a undiscovered gem, a piece of piano music by a composer who's famous for doing anything but piano music that could be adapted to this challenge. And and that will be more in line with like this piece, Boulanger and Ravel and so on. It'll remind you more of those, while completely being its own thing and presenting completely different challenges to us as orchestrators in making things feel spontaneous. And then after that will be a massive free for all in the 10th anniversary, with many choices, many different approaches. I want to make it interesting, and I might take a couple of months off from my regular gig just to make everything work. All right, so all that stuff is coming up over the next 3 years, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing what all of our orchestrators are doing, especially after looking at a great score like this. Thank you, Patreon supporters. Thank you, website subscribers and viewers of this channel. And to you, Miriam, I really, really appreciate this opportunity to take a look at this work and tell you what I think about it. See everybody really soon with a couple more scores today.